I have a video here of my mother talking about her experiences writing the book trust with Prabhupada. It's not working towards here, so what I'll do is I will turn it around and you can all come close and watch it. Something that shows about how Prabhupada comes to us in many ways. My first contact, I went a couple years ago to see bands play at the Orange County Fairgrounds. This was, 1967. And at the end, the Mystic Arts Group, which had a vegetarian booth, they all got together and they were singing this song. So the Mystic Arts world was run by the Brotherhood of Love. I asked the one big guy whose name was Tiny, I said, what is this song they're singing? He said, well, there's a Swami named Prabhupada who has a temple on Pico Boulevard. Now, right now, the temple is in Huatzika. When I first went, it was in La Cienega, but Pico was even before my time. So he said, the Swami taught us this mantra, and it went like this: Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And so I chanted that with them. And we see when we do a little bit of chanting, as we take a step to Krishna, Krishna takes 10 steps to us. Doesn't matter how good we've done, we still need to chant today. Doesn't matter how bad we were, we still chant. If we're very good, we're improve. If we're very bad, we pull ourselves out of the muck. The process is the same. So after doing that, a few days later, a friend of mine was shooting at some animals, and he killed the dove, the bird of peace. Oh, it's going to work, huh? He killed the dove, the bird of peace, and I said, that's a cruel thing to do. He said, well, you eat meat, don't you? I said, yes, don't most of us? He said, well, so is it any worse for me to kill one more bird than for you to eat all those animals? I said, you're right. He said, so it's okay for me to kill the bird? I said, no, I'll never eat meat again. And so then I'd been a vegetarian for a while, and that's how Prabhupada came to me first, was that the people had heard Prabhupada chant, and they chanted. No devotees were there. But by hearing this, I was able to engage in the chanting. So at the Mystic Arts World store, they had a bookstore, and some of my friends worked in the bookstore. And they would ask me to watch the store for them while they would do other things. So I was reading one book called Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And in this book it said, bhakti means that we just ask God for some way to serve him. And I thought, that's nice. And I said, I'd like to spread love of God too. So I went to my meditation rock on the beach. You can see that on my Facebook. And I would pray for some way to develop love of God. Finally, on January 5th, 1970, it's coming up 50 years now, that's when I plan to really dedicate myself to Krishna consciousness on my 50th anniversary. Every day I try to rededicate myself, but that should be a good day. So I was praying, please send me some way to develop love of God. And some of the people from the mystic arts world, they were progressive and they were spiritual. And they would say, someday, for real spiritual life, we have to give up illicit sex and intoxication. But not yet, we'll do it later. But at least the seed was planted. So I had this real strong inspiration on that day that if I want love of Godhead, I have to give up illicit sex and intoxication. So I said, okay, God. I said, this is kind of a big test. I tell you what I'll do. I'll go to a couple of beer parties before high school's over in June. I'll date a couple girls I've been thinking about, and then I'll give it up in June. It's always better to start new things when summer begins. And then I thought, it's either worth doing at all or it's not worth doing. So I said, all right, God, I'll give up these things, and you send me some way to develop love for you. And so I thought, how long will it take me to find out? A week? A month? A year? I opened my eyes, and as far away as Devaki Priya is a devotee dressed in saffron walking to me. And I thought, Hare Krishna, this is what I'm supposed to do? And he came up and I said, what are you doing on the beach? He said, well, we were up on the hill chanting, and all of a sudden I had this uncontrollable compulsion to come down to the beach. So he said, would you like to come and chant with us? I said, I think that's exactly what I'm supposed to do. So I went and chanted with them, and they told me that there was a, we can start it in a minute, that there was a Bhagavad-Gita class Mondays and Wednesdays. So I went to a couple of those, and they said, we also have a Sunday feast. So I went to the Sunday feast, and there was my friend Bob Morell. He was already coming since August. So very soon after that, Prabhupada came back to Los Angeles, and I brought another old friend, and the three of us would stay at the temple Saturday night and help the devotees make the feast. And then all the people, we'd have the feast at noon, all the people there would collect all the people in their cars, and they would take as many people to LA to have a second feast with Prabhupada. And this was fantastic. Well, as soon as I saw Prabhupada, I knew this was my spiritual master. The second time I went, there was initiation going on, and Jai Tirtha was being initiated, and at the end, everybody lined up in the street for Prabhupada to touch them on the head. And there was no space for me, so I knelt down in the gutter by the street, and they opened the door, so Prabhupada walked past me. But when the door shut, Prabhupada saw me next to him, and he says, oh, Hare Krishna. And he opened the door and got back out and touched me on the head. And just like that, I felt liberated from so many past sins. Now, what was interesting in this was that my mother wanted to find out what was going on. The teacher, one of my friends who was in this class, we were in a humanities class together, and 11 out of these 14 people were vegetarians, and we all went to see Prabhupada at the LA temple as a school project, and the next week we would talk about it. Those two boys who came with me later became Badri Narayan and Bayahari. So my mother came with one of her old friends because she thought if the teacher, maybe I'd better go to see that. And later on, when I was in India, my mother had the chance to do some legal work for Prabhupada and write the book trust for Prabhupada, which we will show in a few minutes. So I continued going to Laguna and LA Temple until high school was over. And then when high school was over, they moved the temple from La Cienega to Watsika Avenue. When high school was over, I went to Europe. And I was with my family, and we were going to take a little tour, and then I was going to join the temple afterwards. So I'm going down the Seine River on the boat, and I look at the menu. Eggs, beef, ham, everything was meat, except half a slice of melon. I go, that's good, I'll order that. And it came with a big piece of ham in it. So I was glad I would bring nuts with me, because nuts don't go bad and they're pure vegetarian. But I was so depressed that the only vegetarian item had ham in it. So my parents went into one restaurant, and I was praying to Krishna, please give me a way to serve Prabhupada and be with the devotees. I heard the ting, 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 ting. And outside the La Coupole restaurant, the devotees were there. So I went and joined the Paris temple. And then when it was freezing cold, I said, Krishna, I'll make you a deal. The French boy was opening and shutting the windows. My beads had already been sent to Prabhupada to chant on for initiation, but it was freezing cold and we had no heat and electricity. So he's opening and shutting the windows, letting the cold air in. I said, what are you doing? He said, set to an austerity. I said, isn't it enough of an austerity that we have no heat and no electricity, and you're letting in more cold air? So I said, Krishna, I will make you a deal. If you get me out of this cold, I promise never ever to complain about heat ever. So 3 days later, a letter came from Prabhupada saying, please send 3 devotees to India. So I was on my way. We took the Afghan Airways. We had to go to London, and then the plane went from London to Paris to Rome. It's a DC-3 with a propeller. Rat-tat-tat-tat-tat. It went London, Paris, Rome, Athens, Greece, Cairo, Egypt, Beirut, Lebanon, Tehran, Iran, Kabul, and then to Delhi. So we got off in Delhi, and people had never seen Western brahmacharis. They came by the thousands, and we took the train to go be with Prabhupada in Mumbai. So when we got to there, myself and one other boy were very young, and Prabhupada told the devotees like Shaimasundar and Brahmananda, these are young boys, you must take care of them. So they would always come and fix my buttons. And so there was initiation that was going to take place, and Prabhupada was going to chant on my beads again. So I thought, wow, I get the lucky from twice. So at the initiation ceremony, just before Prabhupada was going to chant on my beads, he said to Guru Das, go get the Western yogi out in the crowd. And there was thousands of people, but we didn't see any Western yogi. He says, go get him out there. Guru Das says, we don't see anyone. He says, out there. He says, no, we don't see. Then all of a sudden, some of the people cleared, and there was one person with the matted hair. Prabhupada said, see, he is there. But somehow Prabhupada was pointing there before he even saw him. So he told, go get him. So Guru Das brought him, and Prabhupada said, sit right here. And then Prabhupada chanted on my beads. And that person became Radhanath Swami. So after, there was a big kirtan, and we were all jumping around, Radhanath and Prabhupada and Tamal Krishna. And that was my initiation ceremony. So I spent a year at the Akash Ganga building with Prabhupada, and we had many pastimes there. And I'll interject in a minute here with when my mother comes. So first, we would go on many programs. We went to a Mr. Shetty's house who had a vegetarian. His wife had won a worldwide vegetarian cooking contest. And she had so many wonderful preparations. And when the stuff went out, I saw Prabhupada offering it to Krishna. And then he said, we are the International Society for Eating Consciousness. He said, I must take them home or they will want to eat again. So we went to many engagements like this where people were interested to see the dancing white elephants, as they called them. They wanted to see the Western people involved. So we went to the biggest movie producer in India, J. Om Prakash's house. He said, I'll tell you the truth. Indian movies are silly. So that discouraged me from watching Indian movies, because he said they're ready to kill each other, but they stop for a dance. So Prabhupada was sick, so Prabhupada had to come, but then Prabhupada came and saw a big murti of Shiva and says, oh, Lord Shiva, Hare Krishna. And Dr. Bali, who was married to the famous dancer Vijanti Mala, he gave a talk there. And Prabhupada gave a talk, and some of the biggest movie stars in India, the four Kapoor brothers, many actors and actresses have come from them. Most of their names begin with R, don't they? There's a Ravi and a Reshma and anything else. There's so many with R, aren't there? Ravi Kapoor, I think, is in America in the TV shows. But there are so many of them that came from those. And Rajesh Khanna, who made that movie Hati Marasati. Never saw the movie, but I know he was famous for it. And Devanand was there, and so many others, and they all became life members that night. So we went on many wonderful programs like this. Is that going to work with the... So, besides these programs, we used to get to go on walks with Prabhupada. I'm doing it in chronological order. So I'll bring the walks afterwards, because then Prabhupada went back to America, and he wanted to do the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. And so they asked if there was an attorney, and they said, well, Kshudy Das's mother is a trust attorney. So she came up to meet with Prabhupada and wrote the book trust. So since that's in the chronological order, that was done in maybe June, July of 71, and she came in August. So we'll show that now, and then I will go on with more stories that happened with walks with Prabhupada, and Prabhupada coming back from Nairobi. Let's see if we can get this going now. So this is my mother who will be speaking about it, and she quite often calls me by my Karmi name Kevin, but sometimes she says Kshudy. That's why on my Facebook it's Kevin Kshudy Spencer. That way, whichever name people know me by, they can find me, because there's no other Kevin Kshudy Spencer.
Kevin wanted me to talk about Prabhupada, or whoever asked Kevin to ask me, and also a little bit about my experiences with Krishna consciousness. So I'd like to start with that, if I may. I first learned about Krishna consciousness in 1969, I believe, in Laguna Beach, when the Laguna Temple started in a little house out in Laguna Canyon, a very modest place, with about 10 members. And Kevin's philosophy teacher got him interested, and then I thought I'd better find out a little bit about it too. So I became rather well acquainted with that group, and in 1970 my family took a trip on Kevin's high school graduation to Europe, and we lost him over there. In Paris, we went to a well-known restaurant in the Latin Quarter, and the devotees were all out in front singing and chanting. So when we ended our trip through Europe, as we had planned, he said he wanted to go back to Paris and stay there. And so we thought, well, okay. And we put him on the train in Zurich, wasn't it? And I didn't see him for a long time. I visited the Paris temple in the winter of 71, and that was an experience too. For those of you who know Paris, it was in the 14e arrondissement, which is way, way out from the center of town, and past the Montparnasse, and they lived in a little 2 or 3 story, it was on the 2nd or 3rd story apartment. As I recall, there were only 8 or 10 of them, led by Hari Vilas, who was from Chicago or Michigan. This was in Paris. And even with that small group, and clear back in 1971, they made their presence very well known. They went on Sankirtan all over the streets, and I went with them a few times, and sometimes they were well received, but I remember the slop bucket that was thrown on us from some house. And they also gave lectures and feasts at the American University in Paris. And so quite a few people became interested in that and came to the movement. After Kevin was in Paris, he went to India and was in Bombay for some period of time. And I happened to be in London at a bar association meeting, and I thought, well, that's real close to Bombay. I'll run over there. And so I visited him there, and that was extremely interesting. That was the summer of 71. That temple was headed by Madhuvisa, and not more than 10 people, maybe 10 or 12. And they lived in an apartment a good ways out from the center of town, but it was very interesting. The Pakistani embassy was on one floor, and they occupied a floor, and Ravi Shankar, the sitarist, lived on another floor, so it was kind of an interesting building. Again, that was early in the movement, but they were very well received because it was at a time when the Indian youth were straying away from their religious beliefs, and the parents were very upset about it. And so here were these American youths following their principles, so they invited them to speak and come to their homes to show an example of American youth. I don't remember any women in the group in Paris, but there were several women in Bombay. Tulsi, I remember, a small girl, and I don't remember that there was any difference in participation between the men and the women. I remember that Tulsi was a particularly dedicated and hard-working devotee, and there were some others in there too, but she's the one I remember personally. In the early 70s, I represented the Laguna chapter, or individuals in it. Seems to me Steve was one of them at one time, weren't you? Who got arrested for various things, various egregious crimes like chanting on the sidewalk and being on the beach and so forth. And I remember one young girl who was arrested for just such an egregious crime and kept overnight in jail and given a body search for chanting on the sidewalk. And I went before the city council several times. They were not well received at that time. It was a hard job. And I guess as a result of doing some of that, I became acquainted with Karanda, head of the LA temple. And I had a number of conversations with him, and he asked me if I would help Prabhupada with the book trust. And I said to the extent that I was capable, I would. And so he sent me a draft of the proposed trust prepared by an attorney in India, and then gave me verbally some of the ideas that Prabhupada wanted to incorporate in it. So I prepared a draft of the Bhagavad book trust and sent it to Karanda to propose to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada came back with a number of questions and then invited me up. And so I think we went up within a few days in July of 71. And I had the honor to meet with Prabhupada privately and personally. When I say private, I'm quite sure Karanda was there. But it was very informal and very pleasant and very easy. There was no arrogance or ostentation about him whatsoever. And we didn't sit at an office austerely across from one another, but we sat in a back chamber and talked in a very congenial, personal manner. I asked him if he knew my son, Kshudy, and he said, "Isn't that the young brahmachari in Bombay?" I said, "Yes, that's him." And actually, I met with Prabhupada before I made that trip to Bombay, so I was sort of big stuff when I got there to Bombay, announced who I had just been with. So I prepared the book trust for him, and he had a number of things he wanted included. He was very clear. He had a lot of confidence in his trustees, which included Karanda and Shina Sundar. I don't know, I'm sure the London lady will know those people. Huh? Oh, to whom? Oh, well, I guess that scratches my next 4 paragraphs. I enjoyed them very much, and Prabhupada had a great deal of confidence in their discretion, and he emphasized that he wanted them. I kept asking, do you want these limitations and these restrictions, and he did not. He had a lot of confidence in those trustees, and he wanted them to have the discretion, but he was very clear that the book trust should be handled as a separate entity, that the proceeds go 50% to the book fund, which would generate new books and printing and everything that had to do with the publications. I should say, you probably all know anyway, that at that point he assigned all his publications, all his writings and copyrights to the trust. And 50% of the proceeds then were to go to the book fund and 50% to the building fund to be used for acquisition of new properties and improvement of properties for temples all over the world. And then, curiously enough, he asked, I have notes that he, when I was visiting him, that he asked me to incorporate a provision that in the discretion of the trustees, they could make donations to other charitable contributions, whatever, having nothing to do with Krishna consciousness. And so that was hopefully the beginning of that. I was very privileged and honored to have met with him, but his demeanor with me was so easy and warm and friendly and personal that it didn't seem like a big job at all. He made me very comfortable from the outset. I think I'm becoming inelegant, which means not short and not sweet. See if I had anything. One last comment on my travels. I visited Kevin in South Africa when there were just Rishi Kumar and Kshudy Das were there, and as I recall, Prabhupada had given them a large supply of books for distribution in Durban and Johannesburg, and they were the only two devotees with this pile of books, and they were very well received there too by the Indians. There was, when we flew into, my husband and I flew into Durban, there were several very prominent businessmen there to meet us, and it stayed in my mind for a long time because apartheid was much in evidence in those days. And so these very, very fine-looking people accompanied us to our hotel, and we invited them in, and of course they couldn't come in because apartheid applied to Indians as well as to blacks and any minorities. And so my husband at that time, who was quite a gagster, changed our room wherever it was and put it up where the suites were up near the top, and took them around to the back elevator, and we smuggled them in. And they came up, and they were delightful people. And I think that you met with some of them, didn't you, on a trip over there? Some of those people are since very much involved in the new temples that have been built there. Then after Rishi Kumar left, Kevin stayed on and sold the whole package before he came home. That's right, you were. That's right. Which is a compliment from that country. I'd just like to comment that I think the changes in the movement are so dramatic and so significant and so meaningful since those days that I've been telling you about. I think my objection in those days was the cloistered manner in which they were living and the isolation from society, and I didn't like that. I found that very difficult, and I think there was a great deal of opposition from people in general who never took the time to find out what was going on, and now today you all still retain the same values and apply them, but you apply them in every aspect of society, business and social, and I think that's extremely meaningful for your movement as well as productive for society in general. I think I've cut somebody's speech down short. Thank you.
It's okay, I'll disconnect that. Let's see here.
For those of you who have forgotten, my name is Kshudy. And for those perhaps who have not yet had the pleasure to meet, my name is Kshudy.
Okay. Let me turn those two off. So, you see, that's why Mother came to visit at that time. And you see one thing there, it's amazing that later on Karundar left the movement. And he came to my mother and said, I left the movement because I thought Prabhupada was wrong. I wanted to centralize everything. And Prabhupada wanted each temple to be separate. And the book fund to be separate. And she said, no, Prabhupada was right. You should listen to your spiritual master, the attorney. Prabhupada told her she was a Kshatriya. She didn't mince words. If you were wrong, she was going to tell you that. And as you see, she said Prabhupada understood exactly what was going. It's a tottering platform. So you see that, Prabhupada was spiritually qualified, but he was also materially qualified. It's just like Preetha was telling me that he was talking about a castle that they could have gotten from Rothschild family that was worth $3 million. He talked him down to $1 million. And he said Prabhupada had gone to that building and checked out the beams, checked out the water for leaks, and yet he couldn't get his authorities to go along with it. Prabhupada wanted it. You're getting a $3 million building for $1 million. Did you ever get that chance? No. Devaki Priya and I have been involved with people who try to buy properties. If you can get it for 60 or 70% of the value, you're happy, right? If there was a $3 million building for $1 million, would you find the people to put it together? Quick? Or would you say, well, maybe it's not? You have 60, 70, 80% is considered a good deal, isn't it? But 1/3? And Prabhupada liked it. So Prabhupada understood these things. How many people do you know who can take a trust agreement and ask questions about the things that are on there and explain what they want in a trust agreement? Who can do that? Most people don't even know what that is. Even attorneys in other fields don't know what that is. And Prabhupada has showed what he wanted and asked questions about particular things and understood. Now, people who have trusts done are not, it's not like simple law. It's for people who have money or properties or religious things or books or something that needs to be protected for the future. So Prabhupada understood exactly what was going on. Spiritually and materially, he understood these things. And I saw this with him in Mumbai because in Mumbai we got to go on lots of walks. We went to the Hanging Gardens the one time. When my mother came too, after meeting with Prabhupada, she said she wanted to come. We came to visit Vrindavan, but we didn't come to Krishna Balaram Mandir. You know why? It was 71. So we actually stayed in Agra and got a car from there and toured around Vrindavan. Went to Banki Bihari, and I went to take a picture, and I fell over. People grabbed me as I was falling. And we went to Radha Govinda Mandir and all these places in 1971. There was nothing over here. And you see, when we were pioneering these things, like when devotees were here in Mumbai, people don't get the idea. He says, they asked me when I went to South Africa, did you go to the Sri Sri Radha Radhanath temple? I said, no, I went there to plant a seed. People don't realize the things we went to do just to go start something somewhere. That'll come a little later in the story. So we got to take many walks with Prabhupada. We went to the Hanging Gardens, which is near the temple in Chowpatty. So we had many walks and programs with Prabhupada. So we were walking around the Hanging Gardens, and these two impersonal swamis came and were talking and said, would you like to come to our ashram? We said, well, Prabhupada, if you want to go. Prabhupada said, not like that. He says, if we all want to go, we'll go. Otherwise, we won't. And we thought, well, okay, let's go then. I'm thinking, wow, he's almost 80 and I'm 18 and he's the spiritual master and he's asking me. So we went there and Prabhupada is just sitting on the floor preaching to them in Hindi. And then he turns to me and he's as close away as I had and he says, "You came from France recently, didn't you?" I said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada, I did." And I was amazed that even though I'm an American, he remembered that I had come through France to come to there. It's amazing that he remembered that with, because this was already, I was initiated in March, and this was maybe more like September. So, trying to do this in a chronological order. So then pretty soon, Prabhupada was going to go to Russia. So Nanda Kumar wanted an assistant to help with pujari work. So he asked Prabhupada, "Prabhupada, can we have a guide to initiation for Kshudy Das?" He says, "Yes, we were going to initiate Jaganivas too." So he chanted on both of our threads. And usually either chants on the thread or he puts it on you. And I had my beads chanted on twice. First before I got there, and second as Prabhupada gave me the beads. So then Prabhupada decided, because Jaganivas came, that we'd have a ceremony for the Brahma initiation. And I thought, now I'm getting the mercy twice. He chanted on the thread and he's going to put it around me. So afterwards he comes towards me and he looks at me and I'm thinking this. And he turns away and goes over and puts the thread on Jaganivas. And Brahmananda goes, no, that thread was supposed to be for Kshudy Das. And I said, "No, I know what Prabhupada's doing. I'll explain it to you later." And so he remembered that and gave the thread to Jaganivas, which, I was thankful to get the mercy once. I didn't need a double mercy twice. So there's initiation. It was funny. And I'm fanning, and then I'm trying to chant too. So the one woman says, "Here, let me fan." And she's fanning. And Prabhupada says, "Why did he stop fanning? He was fanning so nicely." She says, "Well, he has to do mala." He says, "Well, then stop chanting and do the fanning again." So I stopped chanting. Now, it doesn't mean I should stop chanting all the time. That only at that case did he say. So I stopped chanting and did the mala. So it was amazing. He says, "Why is he not fanning?" It's maybe he didn't feel appropriate having the woman fanning him. Prabhupada was good to the women, but he never says, "Come in my room alone." He'd have the women sit and the men sit all together like here. He'd never be alone with the women or have anything look inappropriate. He was good to them, gave them plenty of opportunities, but he never was alone with one. So, but I got to be alone with Prabhupada a lot of times. It was getting close towards the war in India and Pakistan, and I would be alone with Prabhupada because what would happen was that because we were in the building, we couldn't do a loud kirtan for Mangal Artik. So many people would sleep in. So Nanda Kumar was supposed to do the Mangal Artik, but he would wake up every day and have a different excuse. So I said, "You know what, it's easier for me just to do it than wonder that I'm going to do it 5 days but don't know which 5, so I'll just do it." So it's funny, later he asked, "Does Prabhupada ever come out when you're doing the Mangal Artik?" I said, "Every single day." "Oh, yes, I would go to make the plate and I would hear him translating the 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. I would hear it through the wall. And it was the Prabhupada's room was here, and the temple room was here facing the ocean, and then we had another little room here, like a foyer beginning room, and then we had 3 bedrooms in the back. So Prabhupada would come out when I'm offering the flower, and I would just hand the flower directly to Prabhupada. So it was just me and Prabhupada in the temple. And then later on, it would be just me and Prabhupada, because when it was time for Prabhupada's lunch, I would take Prabhupada's plate into him, and I would put away the Sanskrit commentaries he had by Jiva Goswami, Sridhar Swami, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Big books, right? He was using these plus his own purports into that to give us the Bhaktivedanta purports. So he put a lot of effort into these. So I'd put the books away, and I'd put the plate in front of Prabhupada. I felt like a fish does in a bowl. You know, a fish is in a bowl and everybody's watching everything they're doing. I felt like there's no secrets from this person, but I can trust this person. He's going to help me and forgive me for my mistakes and guide me by the hand. And so I felt very comfortable, yet very vulnerable at the same time. So then I would go out and serve all the devotees their prasadam. And then when the devotees' prasadam was finished, I would go in and get Prabhupada's plate. Then I would clean that plate off and put the remnants on another plate. And what was left over, that was my lunch for about 2 months in a row. So I told about my Gayatri. Prabhupada went to Russia. So that was before that part. And then when Prabhupada came back, we took many walks with Prabhupada. One time we were waiting for Prabhupada to come back, and the doorbell rang, and we played the drums and threw the flowers all over the milkman who'd showed up. We thought it was Prabhupada coming back. And taking walks with Prabhupada was amazing because there was only a few of us. And we were stuck in the building a lot because during the India-Pakistan war, we had a blackout. We had to put paper on the windows. One day I'm doing the Artik, and I see there's wah, the air raid siren comes on, something like wah, wah, wah. It's one loud sound, wah. That means the Pakistani planes are coming. Get down underneath something. And so it's funny, I tell people I was here in Mumbai for the war. They go, what war? Did you study the India-Pakistan war? I studied it by watching bombs come out of the Pakistani planes to drop right near us. That was my study. I was there for it. And there's something about seeing bombs explode and tracer bullets going up at the planes. There's something about that doesn't make you feel very comfortable. It's that easy. They're going, Jayo, Jaya, Gora, Chande, Aroti, Ke, boom, right? And I felt very uncomfortable. I thought, you know what, I don't feel safe here. I have got to get out of this place somehow. So the next day I'd go into Prabhupada's room, and usually Prabhupada was alone there. And I'd put the water on Prabhupada's head and give Prabhupada the flower. At this time he was there with Yadubara and Vishaka and Tamal Krishna Swami. And I'm in such anxiety. So I start to pay my obeisances to leave, and then Prabhupada looks up and he says, just a minute. And he looks at me, he says, so everything is all right? And just like that, the anxiety cleared away. And the next day my mother called from America, which calls then were, you know, you had to wait a few hours from America. And from India, you didn't dial a cell phone. You went down to the main post office and booked a call, and you could get through within 2 hours. If you did it from the place, it might take 2 days to get a call through. So it might be just the time you go out to do something, the call comes through. Because you book a call, you're never quite sure when it's going to go. So couldn't just pick it up and dial. It's not like now you dial 001 and a number and you get someone in America. Well, not with all the cell phones now. People don't answer anymore, but there was a point when it was easy, and now it's not as easy again because people don't answer them. But so then when the war was over, we went for a walk with Prabhupada, and he stops and he says, what has become of Yahya Khan? He says, I think they have killed him. Another time, right after we'd been bombed, we went on a walk. We stopped to get some newspapers to see like what else had been bombed, what they were planning to bomb next. And I'm looking at one newspaper, and Prabhupada's looking at another. And Prabhupada says, can we trade newspapers? I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. He says, no, when you are finished. So Prabhupada was very kind to us. And that's why we want to stick to Prabhupada. We can't think we're doing so well we don't need Prabhupada, or we're doing so poorly we've ruined the mercy. Whatever stage we're at, we still need Prabhupada. It's like the electricity. No matter how well you read or how poorly you need, you turn the light off, it's over, isn't it? So we had many great times with Prabhupada in Mumbai. So then it was coming time for the Mayapur festival. And before that, it was decided that Rishi Kumar Swami should go to South Africa to open a temple. And then he asked if I could go to it. I'm thinking, well, why me? And then I thought, well, why not me? There's an opportunity to go to a new country and start something. And of course, we didn't go till the temple was ready, right? So I heard some of Prabhupada's godbrothers but asked him, why didn't you go to America? I said, well, it wasn't ready for me yet. But Prabhupada didn't wait for it was ready. He went to get it ready. So it was decided I would go to South Africa. And so we, but before that, we were going to take the train to Calcutta. But before that, Prabhupada had gone to Kenya. And he came back, but Shyamachandra had lost the yellow fever card. And if you're coming from Kenya to here, even though only 3 people had it in the last 2 years, they want that card, unless you have a note from the doctor that says you're not allowed to have it, which I have that note. And they check it out carefully, they ask for the supervisor, and I get through. But you know, they scrutinize it real carefully. So they put Prabhupada in the quarantine hospital in Andheri. So I thought, well, we couldn't come inside, so I would stay in the parking lot there. And when it was time for the Mangal Artik, I would go inside and we would sing with Prabhupada. And then afterwards, they had this one room with like 4 ping pong tables, maybe 6 in a row, and they were in the middle of the room. So Prabhupada would walk around these tables chanting, and I would walk too. So when I would get to the middle, I'd look across at Prabhupada and he would look at me. And then when I get to the middle of the other side, I'd look at Prabhupada and he'd look at me. And I did this for several days in a row because he wasn't allowed out of the quarantine hospital. And at the time he was doing the book about dialectic spiritualism. He was talking about the philosophers like Socrates, Aristotle. Shyamachandra was saying, Prabhupada was saying what they did good and what they didn't do. He thought Socrates did quite well. Actually, he had many good things to say about Socrates. If you look at that book, he analyzes the different philosophers and how close they came to Krishna consciousness or how far away they were. So then after that, it was time to go to Mayapur because Prabhupada he'd gotten some land there. He wanted to lay the cornerstone for the big project there, which we're just about to be finished with. And so we took a 3rd-class train, which they don't even have anymore. You see how low class it was, because we rode 3 days from Mumbai to Calcutta, and it cost us 50 rupees. How far can you go for 50 rupees now? Not very far in the train, right? Not all the way across India, can you? No. They don't even have the 3rd class anymore. But that's what it was. I don't know if it was 50 rupees for both of us or 50 rupees each, but either way, it's still cheap, isn't it? So we got to Mayapur. It was interesting. There was just a little thatched hut with Jayapataka Swami and Achuchananda Swami. And I walked up to Prabhupada's, to the yoga pit. And one of Prabhupada's godbrothers were there. And he said to me, so how are Jayapataka Swami and Achuchananda Swami? I said, they're good. He said, see, I know your devotees, all of them. I said, well, we'll have more soon. I said, you haven't met me yet, but we'll have more soon. Then he says, you know, your Swamiji, meaning Prabhupada, should not have gone to the West without the permission of the Smat. So I thought, now I have to defend Prabhupada, but not insult his godbrother. So let me think how to lock him into something. So I said, very innocently, who started this Smat? He says, my spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. I said, oh, so he and the Mat are non-different? He says, yes, but why? I says, because if he and the Mat are non-different, and he asked my spiritual master to go to the West, then he already has the permission. I said, thank you so much for helping me clear this up. Because the idea is not to start an argument and accuse. curse and counter curse. The idea is to get to the point that Prabhupada was authorized. So let him come up with the answer and get the credit for it. It's not important I get it. He's the one that said Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was non-different. So he's the one that said Prabhupada was authorized. Let him have the credit for it. Why not? The point is to prove that Prabhupada was authorized. It's just like if Narendra Modi sends you to America, do they ask you, yes, but do you have the government's permission? If the person who is non-different from the Mat sends you, then obviously you have the permission. So then very soon after that, Prabhupada showed up on the train with his godbrother Bhakti Vaibhava Puri Maharaj. So then we put up a big tent, and in the thatched hut, Prabhupada stayed with his godbrother Bhakti Vaibhava Puri Maharaj, not Pramod Puri, Vaibhava Puri. He was younger than Prabhupada. But you would see them, they would talk looking in each other's eyes, and they would walk together, take a japa walk up to the yoga pit and back. It's amazing because at the time, Bhakti Vaibhava Puri Maharaj was only about 56. And I think I'm like 12, 11 years older than that now. It's amazing. Amazing how time passes. So Prabhupada got together all of his godbrothers. He had Vaibhava Puri Maharaj and go personally invite many of them. So it was time to lay the cornerstone. And we dug a hole, and Prabhupada went in and put dirt in. His godbrothers went in and put dirt in. Then the sannyasis went and put dirt in. And then I went and put dirt in. And then Prabhupada, it was brilliant how he brought this forward. He says, now that we're all together, the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, now that we're together, we will do what our Guru wanted. We'll form a governing body commission, and from today forward, we'll work as one movement instead of small, separate movements. And they all went jai, jai, jai. And later on, it was funny, before some of them were saying, well, he was junior member, and so he said, well, we'll work all together. They said, oh, but you'll become more prominent. Well, you can't have both, right? He's either the junior member or he's going to be more prominent, but he can't be both. And it would have been a wonderful opportunity to work together. And it also shows they know that he had the potency. Because if they really believed that they were more prominent than him, they would have jumped on the idea of forming a joint governing body. Isn't it? If you know more than the other people, let's say we're going to form a governing body here about Spanish language. Would Atmarama be happy with that? Yes, because he's the only one that really speaks Spanish, right? You wouldn't object, would you? We'll form a governing body here to evaluate Spanish literature. You'd know that you'd be on the top, wouldn't you? You wouldn't say, oh no, you'll all become more prominent, because he knows the Spanish. So the fact that they didn't want to join it proves that they knew that Prabhupada would be more prominent. If they thought they'd be more prominent, they would jump on the chance. Then they would be able to take over all of the Gaudiya mission and Prabhupada's mission too. If they were more prominent, that's what would happen, right? But it didn't happen. They didn't even take the chance. You'd think you'd try. So Prabhupada says we'll keep our own governing body and work from there. But this was the idea that Bhaktisiddhanta wanted. That's why when some people come to me today and they say that when Prabhupada laid the cornerstone, he wanted to appoint someone as his successor, it was totally out of character. Prabhupada wanted what Bhaktisiddhanta wanted, to form a governing body, not to appoint just one successor. So we see how Prabhupada very delicately, but yet forcefully, put together a chance for them to all work together on that. So, excuse me. He has a crying baby there, as Dinabandhu says. So, it was time for me to go to South Africa, so I went into Prabhupada's room and I said, Prabhupada, I'm going to Africa now. I hope this gives me an opportunity to increase my service to you. And Prabhupada put his hands behind his head and he simply said, service to Lord Chaitanya, service to Lord Chaitanya, service to Lord Chaitanya. is offering my service. So we went to Nairobi first, and then we went to South Africa, and we started doing programs there and ordered some books, as my mother had said. Prabhupada talks about it in Nectar Devotion tapes. In the first tape, about 33 minutes in, he mentions that 2 devotees are in South Africa, Rishi Kumar Goswami, and he calls me the Bengali pronunciation, Kshudy Das Brahmachari, are in South Africa. So we were doing many preaching there. And then one day, and my parents came to visit, and they brought us incense sticks, and they bought us a car to use. And one day I woke up, and Rishi Kumar is gone. And the car my parents bought is gone too. I look around, I find a note. It says, "Dear Kshudy, decided to split." So I turned the page over, I looked for the other page. I couldn't believe that this was my explanation. There has to be more than this, doesn't there? So then I thought, well, I'm going to have to come up with a plan, because there's no devotees to ask. I didn't even have neighbors. I could have asked neighbors if I'd had any what to do. So I thought, well, I don't want to hide what he did. I don't want to make him any worse, so I'll just write to Prabhupada exactly what happened. So I had to write to him that I woke up, the $2,000 we'd collected was gone. Fortunately, he didn't take the car my parents had bought, because if I had to write that to Prabhupada, he would have thought, oh, the woman that did the legal work for me for free, she bought them a car, and Rishi Kumar left him there alone. So I wrote to him that I was going to order, even though I was in debt, I would order 3,000 more Gitas, and I'd tell people they can't have the Gitas unless they buy the whole set of books, because they all wanted the Gita. And that way I could sell the whole set of books. And I said I was going to make incense sticks to do at the programs and put in a few stores to try to help. I may not do as many programs because it's just me, and I'm going to go in the morning to the shops, and in the evening to the businesses, and if there's a program, I'll try to do books at the program, because my main duty will be to try to sell enough of these to pay off this debt. Because if they throw me out, because they told us to leave the country, and then we left the country and came back. So I couldn't leave then, I would never get back in. So I had to pay off this debt so that if the next people came, they had books to sell, not no books and a debt. That's pretty hard to. So it created an urgency because I was there. So I sent, in those days you had to type them on a typewriter. You've seen a typewriter before? Yes, you've seen one? So yeah, I put carbon copies. I sent one to Karendra in Los Angeles and one to Brahmananda in Nairobi, and explaining what happened. And a letter came back from Prabhupada first. And Shyamachandra told me why. That he would open up all the letters to see what was there. And he said, Prabhupada, a letter came from Kshudy Das in South Africa. And he says that Rishi Kumar left him alone there with no explanation and took all the money with him. And he said Prabhupada's eyes got really big. And he said, we'll immediately dictate a letter, you immediately type it, and then you immediately take it to the post office, and we'll deal with the rest of the mail later. So I thought that's interesting, because it was an urgent need. So I thought when the letter came, maybe I'm in trouble for making so many decisions on my own. So I opened up the top of the letter, and the first line says, I am very much pleased. I go, well, the rest has to be good, doesn't it? He says, at the responsibility you've taken to spread Krishna consciousness in South Africa at such a young age. He said, Rishi Kumar was tempted by Maya and he fell. He said, somehow or other, you were left alone, just like our Narada Muni, and he became our greatest devotee. He said, so I am praying to Krishna that you will have the strength and enthusiasm to carry out this mission. I think Prabhupada is praying to Krishna that I'll have the strength and enthusiasm. I didn't have it. And I use these in so many cases today that I don't have the strength and enthusiasm to carry out things. And I asked Prabhupada, I don't have the strength and enthusiasm. Please pray to Krishna that I will have the strength and enthusiasm to get through these things. And when I end up in a position now without any parents or brothers and sisters or wives, only children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, I think, and there are other places because I'm off preaching and doing things, but I do have my family here, don't I? I have a big family here, don't I? Who's part of my family here? Okay, good. So, but somehow or other, when I'm left alone, I remember it's Krishna's mercy that letter has been able to carry me into so many circumstances. So I have to remember it today, that if things are too big for me, because I was there alone in this country. Okay, I was there alone in this country, and I didn't know who was going to kill me first, because some African people were unhappy with all white people, because the army would come to the township and just shoot many black people. So I was bad being white. Blacks were 80%, whites were 10%, Indians were 2.5%. And there's about 50 million people there. And then, of course, the whites wouldn't like me because I was mixing with people of other races. So some people liked me and some people didn't. But the people who didn't had all the guns. So there was no way I could do this on my own. I'd go to, after Rishi Kumar was gone, I would go to knock on the door to do books. And the people would come out and look up the street. I said, "What are you looking for?" They said, "Your parents are coming, aren't they?" I said, "No, they're not here." They said, "They're coming back to get you later, aren't they?" Because I was 19, I looked about 13. I think some child came, the wife says that some child is at our door telling us about a temple he's going to start. It was seriously like that. I would just stay at different people's houses. We stayed at first we stayed at Popat Laukara's house, and then we stayed in a little room that someone else had. Then we stayed out on a patio at D.P. Desai's house, just like outside on a veranda we stayed. We had no particular place to go. And then Champak Soni gave us his beach house to stay at. So fortunately I was there to hide out from them. But I saw how concerned Prabhupada was with me, because when Rishi Kumar came to Mumbai, Prabhupada said, "You left that young boy all alone and took all the money with you. You give me what other money you have." So he gave Prabhupada $700, and the next letter came with a $700 receipt towards my debt. The next part was, the rand was worth $1.20. It went to being worth $1.50. So now to pay off 15,000, I only had to collect 10,000 instead of 12,500 rand. Now the amount of money I had to collect instantly was reduced by more than 20%. It was amazing. So that made it easier to pay off the debt. And so I was able to pay off that debt. And Prabhupada asked Brahmananda Swami to come and help me. He's 2,000 miles away in Nairobi. So he writes a letter saying, "I'm leaving Nairobi and I'm bringing the Sankirtan devotees, Africans, with me." Next letter comes from Mombasa. I'm in Mombasa and we're on the way. Then the next letter comes from Malalwe. He's getting closer. Then he says, "We're going to Rhodesia and we'll come to there." And then I don't hear from him. Then I get another letter. We didn't have email then. And he says that at the border, because he brought black devotees with him, they wouldn't let him in the country. And so they turned him back and they put in a list that he was never allowed in the country again. So then Prabhupada asked Durdarshan, which means hard to find. So he came, and then 2 weeks later he became Durdarshan, hard to find. So I was there alone again. And then he'd asked Pushta Krishna Swami to come. So then I went to these other cities like East London and Port Elizabeth, and I sold a huge amount of books there. Every business in this one city, East London, took a set of books. And then I sold them at the program. I spent like 3 days there, and then I went to Port Elizabeth for a week and sold a huge amount of books. So I had enough money to pay off the debt. So when the next day after I got home, the security police showed up, and they took me in for questioning. And they took me to get my passport. I took the visa out of it because it was on a separate piece of paper, And they said, where is your visa? I said, it must be with my things coming on Monday. This was a Friday. So I got on the phone and I called my mother and said, send me a ticket. I paid off the book debt, so they all paid for it. And I told Pushta Krishna Swami, you got to be here tomorrow. He said, well, I have my money, but not my assistance. I said, I'll send the money, but you've got to be here tomorrow. And he showed up the next day. And so this shows how Prabhupada took care of us and how we are willing to do things in Krishna's service. It wasn't even there legally. And I had to move around from place to place, sometimes stay on a veranda outside. Then I got a beach house, which was a nice place to stay, but I was still there alone and being hunted by security forces. So we were willing to do all kinds of things in Prabhupada's service. And today we have to have that mood. People ask me, when you went to South Africa, did you go to the Sri Sri Radharanath temple? I said, no. That was built in 85. I was there in 72. We went there to plant the idea. People think, oh, you just go and the temple's waiting for you, and maybe we can make it on time. They don't think you go somewhere and you have to find some land, figure out where you're going to stay, find some people to donate, come up with a plan, collect to build it. They don't realize that's what they had to do, find people to come. You don't just go and wait till it's already done and then you go there. So we need to keep this pioneering spirit. So I will end there. Thank you for your time.